All right, today we'll be doing lessons 11 through 13 on appropriate measurements. So let's say I want to measure, something that we're all pretty familiar with, your own arm. Okay, what kind of units should we use to measure your own arm? Well, let's think about some of the units that we know. Okay, so of course we all know about miles. We normally have to run them in PE. Would a mile be a good measurement for my arm? Probably not, because a mile is way longer than my arm, so probably not a mile. All right, well, what other measurements do we know? We know inches. Would an inch be a good way of measuring my arm? Maybe. It might be a pretty big number, though, maybe like 40. So, it's kind of okay. I'll let you decide if you think inches are all right for that. What about feet? Would a foot be a good measurement tool for my arm? Probably. Yeah, my arm's probably about maybe like 2.5 feet. That's not a bad number. So feet sounds pretty good. Now, as Americans, of course, these are pretty much the only ones that we're super familiar with, but there's a whole host of other ones from the metric system that we could also be talking about. So what about a kilometer? Kilometer is about 0.6 mile. So would that be a good measurement of my arm? No, that's still way too big. So no to kilometer. What about a meter? Now some of you are thinking, I don't know if I know what a meter is. And it's pretty close actually to a yard. That's something I left off over on this side of the measurements we're familiar with. So would a yard be a good measurement of my arm? A yard's about 3 feet. Yeah, because maybe my arm's like half a yard. That's not too bad. So I think yard and meter are probably okay measurements for my arm. Now there's one more. If we go down from kilometer to meter to centimeter, would a centimeter be a good measurement of my arm? Well, centimeters are really, really tiny. Really, really, really tiny. So, I mean, my arm might be something like 200 centimeters. I would think probably not such a good idea to measure your arm in centimeters, because it would take a lot of little measurements. So we can say no to that one. All right, next, what if we were talking about a library card, which is about the same size as, credit cards, ID cards, all of that. What would be an appropriate measurement to use to measure a library card? So again, let's go through all the measurements we know. So what about a mile? Would a mile be a good measurement? Probably not. That's way too big. What about a kilometer, which is about a little bit more than half of a mile? Would that be a good measurement for a library card? Probably not. That's still too big. All right, what about a meter? Would a meter be a good measurement? Probably not, because it's probably like maybe 1/20th of a meter? That's way too small to take notice of. So if a meter is not good, then a yard's probably also not good, because they're about the same size. Well, let's keep going down. What's smaller than a yard? A foot? So what do we think? Do we think a foot is a good idea to measure a library card? It's, I don't know, maybe like 1/6 of a foot. Yeah, I'd say probably not. If you want to say that it's okay, that's fine. It's I'd say probably not. All right, keep going down from a foot. Next come inches. Would an inch be a good measurement? A way to measure? Should we measure our library card in inches? Yeah, probably, because it'd be good to be like, oh, it's about 3 inches. That sounds pretty good. What about centimeters? Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, your library card might be, what, like 10 centimeters? That's not too bad of a measurement then. And there's one that I left off the last one, and you can add it on to the last one. But there's one below centimeters, and that's millimeters. And technically there's stuff below millimeters, but these are the ones that we're pretty familiar with. Would a millimeter be a good measurement for a library card? Now, you may not be familiar with millimeters. Millimeters, there's 100 of them in a centimeter. So if a library card's maybe 10 centimeters, that means there's 1,000 millimeters to make up that library card. That sounds too small. Okay, so maybe the sweet spot for measuring our library card would be in inches or centimeters. One thing that's interesting with appropriate measurements is that sometimes there's not always exactly right answer. Like before with the library card example, some of you might have been okay using a foot to measure how big a library card is. And that kind of happens in society, that there will be appropriate ways to measure one thing and not another. In the same way, I was actually thinking about the other day how someone might say their baby is 18 inches long, and that's a normal way to measure their baby, except why can't we just say the baby is a foot and a half long? Yet that's the socially unacceptable way to measure that baby. In the same way, we have social acceptable measurements here that are not the same in other countries. We don't use the metric system, so we're super familiar with miles, yards, feet, inches. You say any of that stuff to people in Europe, they don't even know what you're talking about. So if you're saying miles per hour to them, they don't even know how to process that number. Same thing if they're saying kilometers per hour to you, you don't even know how fast that is. So appropriate measurements might actually be different depending on what you're talking about, what the information is being used for, and where you are and who you're talking to. So now we're going to be doing examples of not just saying which units you should use to measure something, but more so correctly, essentially, I guess, guessing which measurement is true for a certain length or a certain amount. So let's say the length of your bed. Should we think that that is about 8 feet or a half a mile? Okay. Now, it may be that you are not too familiar with what 8 feet looks like or even what half a mile looks like. Well, you want to think of examples that you do know so that you can compare it. So 8 feet might be the height of, I don't know, maybe about the height of a normal room. No, that sounds too big. Maybe it's the height of a doorway, which is bigger than your average person. So that makes sense for a bed to be bigger than an average person. What about half a mile? Well, for all of us who've done PE class, half a mile is 2 laps around the track. Does that sound about right for the length of a bed? No, that's way too big. So let's go with 8 feet for the length of a bed. All right, what about the length of an average salmon? A salmon's a fish. So would it be 20 inches or 5 feet? Maybe I don't really know exactly how big 20 inches is, but that I can compare it to feet. 20 inches is about, what is that, like less than 2 feet? So maybe a salmon could be 2 feet. That doesn't sound too bad. What about 5 feet? Well, I'm 5'4", so do we picture a salmon being able to come up to here on me? That's a pretty big salmon, so probably not. So for average salmon, we can say 20 inches would be a pretty good estimate of its size. What about a shampoo bottle? We're not talking about length, we're talking about volume. How much fluid is inside that shampoo bottle? Well, it could be 35 fluid ounces, but I honestly don't know if I know how big an ounce is, so let's come back to that one. 35 gallons. Now, I can't picture off the top of my head how big 35 gallons is, but I know what 1 gallon looks like because that's a gallon of milk. We've all seen that. That's this big, those gallons of milk. So could a shampoo bottle have that many as 35 of those gallons of milk? No, that sounds way too big. So just by process of elimination, we can say that the shampoo bottle has 35 fluid ounces in it. So you can see how it's really good to compare these things with things that you already know. All right, what about the volume of a can of olives? So it could be maybe 32 teaspoons or 32 cups. 32 teaspoons, I don't do much baking, so I don't know how big a teaspoon is. So let's come back to that one. 32 cups. Even if you're not familiar with cups as far as in the actual cup for baking, you're familiar with the cup that you drink from. And those ones are probably actually about close to 2 actual cups. So think about 16 cups that you drink from. Does that sound right for 1 can of olive? No, not even close. So by process of elimination, again, we can say that a can of olives is 32 teaspoons. And that's actually it for this lesson. There's not much to it as far as acceptable units.